Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 370 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on how can we use neuroscience to help students thrive. And it's Saturday the 28th of February 2026 as I record this. So this podcast episode is absolutely brilliant. It's fascinating. I flat out love this brilliant conversation with Doctor Lisa Riegel. This was a great podcast interview because she was really informative, engaging, and she really does give us lots of practical tips about how can we use brain science and neuroscience to actually improve students' lives so they become more engaged, their behavior decreases, and it's just such a more positive, welcoming experience for everyone involved in education. So, whether you're an educational psychologist, whether you're an aspiring psychologist, whether you work in education or not, today's podcast episode is going to be absolutely critical for you, and you're going to learn so much about this great area of psychology. So I love this conversation, and she definitely gave me a lot to think about and reflect on, which is someone who wants to work in education for the long term. Her insights were really valuable, and I will be using this in my future work. So thank you so much for this brilliant podcast episode. So you got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. And if you did just want to skip to the interview, then I will put a timestamp in the podcast description and the video description if you're watching or listening on YouTube. So we're moving on to the psychology news section. We're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is morbid curiosity may have benefits for survival. Why do we feel drawn to stare at car crashes, watch gruesome true crime documentaries, and spend hours doom scrolling? Psychologists have long been puzzled what might drive morbid curiosity, especially as discussed generally motivates us to avoid unpleasant scenes, but in a recent paper in Psychological Review, a team at Florida State University argues that there is a perfectly good explanation for all of these activities. Morbid curiosity, also known as morbid fascination, drives us to explore ambiguous situations in which we might learn lessons that could prove helpful for our own survival. I definitely think that this is true to a large extent because one of my most biggest pet hates as a motorist is people doing a rubbernecking, and in the UK, that's what we call people who slow it down just so they can look at a car crash for longer, and it holds up the traffic. So that's really a annoying. But car crashes and reading true crime documentaries, as I spoke about in another podcast episode about the benefits of a true crime, is that we can learn valuable lessons for our own survival and our own lives. For example, true crime tends to teach us about what to avoid, what to do, or what not to do in a given situation. So that can be quite helpful in the case we're ever confronted with a similar crime situation. So I definitely think that there's a lot of different applications here. And I think if we want to apply this, then I would say in our own lives. So personally, applying this, I would say that, well, maybe we need to be more intentional. Maybe we need to be more reflective because this would help decrease the feelings of despair, and this will increase feelings of empowerment, and it will help us feel like we're in control. So the next time that morbid curiosity takes over and you're doom scrolling or you're watching a true crime documentary or something like that, maybe we should just take a step back, spend 2, 3, or even 5 minutes just reflecting on, right, what have I learned? What can I apply this to our own lives? Because otherwise, then you will get into the negative mental health outcomes associated with true crime, which I spoke about on a few podcast episodes a year ago. It's just something to think about. So the second one is to get through the last push, zoom out. Life is full of boring tasks, errands to run, meetings to sit through, admin to complete, and whilst you might assume that knowing these tasks are almost over would make it easier to endure, a new study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology suggests the opposite. That it's precisely when a boring task is nearly finished that it feels the most unbearable. So this is something that me and Doctor Riegel actually talk about in today's podcast episode because what we talk about is that when she's doing a training and the teachers are like sitting through it, then they tend to be quite like disengaged. They tend to be on on their laptops. But when she actually starts talking about brain science and psychology, that's when they become really interested. So, but stepping back to the article, I would say that this is very true. Meetings are very boring. Admin tasks extremely boring, and basically when a task is almost done, you just want it to be done. That's when it becomes unbearable. You really just want it to be done. You want to move on to something else, and if you've been doing it for so long, you're like, oh my god, can't this just be done all already? And all of the feelings of boredom and all the other negative feelings just manifest right at the end, which is quite possibly the worst time. So that's something to think about. So if we want to apply this, something that I might add is that if you're a business psychologist, that's you work in like a businesses and HR department, then your workers are going to be filled with boring tasks. But even in a mental health service, that were like you've got paperwork, you've got to do annual reviews, you've got to do advocacy work, send a bunch of like emails, and some of these procedures will be very dull and very boring after a while, especially if you've been working there for a longer time. So I would say that in our workplaces, we need to be mindful of this issue, and we need to sort of, I would say, like, we can do some collaboration with our workers just so we can help find solutions to this, just so that our workers, they're not getting bored, they're not getting bogged down, and that they don't feel that the work is unbearable because then that decreases our productivity and that could harm the psychology service that we're working in. So, what can we do as psychologists to help overcome that problem? So, that might just be something to think about. And whilst there is another psychology news article by the BPS, there's something that I want to address here. So in the news this week, in the UK, the UK government finally released its massive special educational needs review. And for our international audience, I'm going to very oversimplify it here. So in the UK at the moment, if a parent wants to get what's known as a healthcare and education plan, because my dyslexia, I probably completely switched up the orders of those words. But in essence, this is the legal document that outlines the child's conditions, their needs, and what support they need legally to be able to thrive in the educational setting. And at the time of writing, at the time of recording, you can tell that I've been doing way too many blog posts this week. But what it means is that if you want to get that, then you've got to go through a very lengthy legal battle with your local council and your local authority. They need to approve it. They're not going to want to give you that support because of the funding and the lack of money and the lack of provisions that they can actually deliver. So now what the government's going to do from 2030 is they're going to actually make that even more difficult. So only the children with the most severe special educational needs are going to be able to get that healthcare plan, but instead other children and special educational needs children who still need to see support, but not as much as a healthcare plan now would actually deliver. They will get another sort of like a plan, which is called an individual support plan, and this is organised by the school. Where so instead of the legal fight, parents will have to fight with the school, and that is very oversimplified. And to be honest, there's still lots of questions about this because, to be honest, there's another point of this legal overview, which is essentially that special educational needs teaching staff are going to get training, but the numbers have been crunched. The training only comes to £425 per teaching assistant. That is not a lot of money to train each individual person. And personally, I would be curious to see if the schools actually do this training. What sort of training do they actually give staff? Because lots of people do not get training. So that's one aspect. Another aspect of it is that what actually qualifies a child for a healthcare plan level, which is the most severe, the most highest level needs, compared to what qualifies someone from an individual support plan. So those are some questions that we do not know by the government. Something else that I'm quite curious about is the way this will impact on the parent-school relationship. Because if we think about it, so right now under government plans, the fight between the parent to get their child the level of support that they need because of special educational needs is between the parent and the local government essentially. So that's reasonably fine, but when we consider that parent and the school relationships are often very fraught, this is going to add an extra level of complexity and another layer of negativity. Because if your parent cannot provide your child with that sort of support, then the parent is going to be very angry at that school, and that will damage the parent school relationship. So, and that will have additional knock on effects for the child's education, as outlined in a lot of different psychological models, including my personal favourite, social ecological theory, which is a brilliant theory that I would love to talk about on the podcast, and I will at some point, but not quite at the moment. So, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. I think that moving the fighting and the argument from the local government to the school itself is not a good idea in the slightest. And me, the National Education Union, the British Psychological Society, amongst other professionals, we do want a lot more detail. We want a lot more questions answered because this could have been a groundbreaking moment. And there are lots of brilliant aspects to this video, and the government did a great job in terms of those aspects. But there's still a lot of questions that need to be raised. and need to be answered before 2030. And if you're thinking, oh, that's 4 years away, of course, it's not going to be answered by them. You clearly do not know the UK government. Okay, but this is not a political show, so I just thought that I would share this. I would say that my opinions are definitely in line with those of other professional organisations. That yes, it's a great start. There's lots of really good aspects of this plan, but there are a lot of questions. And my additional point of concern is definitely that a school parent relationship. And if that relationship turns negative because of this increased stress, because of these individual support plans, how will that negatively impact, or it might even positively impact the relationship? It won't. I just want to be balanced. So it might positively impact a child's education. Just some things to think about. So I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So moving on to the personal updates. This week has been a lot of fun, especially because I've been really focusing on doing more psychology writing, learning quite a lot about psychology. So this is a combination of chronic illness, casual dating, the sort of like relationship psychology questions, and really digging into it. And it's been a lot of fun, both in terms of reflecting on like my own life and using my personal experience to like bring the material alive, and also thinking like what I've done and what I could have done differently because of these different tips and tricks. So really interesting. It's a lot of fun, and this really does emphasize why I love psychology and researching it. So on a Monday, me and Dr. Riegel recorded the podcast episode. It was a lot of fun, and I was a bit nervous about recording a podcast episode because, as you know, I tend to record podcast episodes with my friends and people who I know and I have an in person connection with. Dr. Regal, a brilliant woman, and she's from the United States, so I've never met her. So I was really excited to talk to her because she pitched me, but I was a bit nervous as a podcast host. But it was really, but Dr. Regal was a brilliant speaker, and I was so happy after the interview because I just love talking about psychology. I love learning, and I miss psychology conversations so much because I don't work in a psychology service at the moment. I also not at a university, so I'm not engaging with other psychology students daily. So this is what I love the podcast and doing more podcasts to these. And this is something that I really do want to engage more in this year because just having people on the podcast allows me to talk about psychology, and I love it. I'm really interested, and it really gets me fired up. So I just wanted to share that little behind the scenes insight for you. And as always, I love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet on Twitter at sci-fi Whiteley, leave a comment on the Facebook post or LinkedIn post. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. This really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And always feel free to send pictures of where you're listening from. I always love to see what all of you are from all over the world. And today's episode has been sponsored by Cognitive Psychology, a guide to neuropsychology, neuroscience, and cognitive psychology. So this is a brilliant sponsor for today's episode because this great, really easy to understand and fascinating book helps you to understand what is our neuroscience. So how does the neuroscience impact our behavior? So how do our mental processes, so like memory, thinking styles, cognitive biases, decision making, and so many more fascinating insights. Heard of these impact our behaviour. So it's a fascinating book. I love it, and it really does lend nicely to today's podcast episode because we really do focus on like neuroscience and how it impacts behaviour. So if you want a deeper understanding, then definitely check out cognitive psychology, a guide to neuropsychology, neuroscience, and cognitive psychology. Available from all major ebook retailers. You can order the paperback and hardback version from Amazon, local bookstore, or local library if you request it. Or if you want the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence, then now you can add selected audiobook retailers like Spotify, Kobo, Google Play, Barnes& Noble, and selected library systems like Overdrive and Biblioteca. And whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. So a massive thank you to my patrons. Your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. So if you want to become a patron of the show and get access to over 80 exclusive blog posts that will be made into podcast episodes for weeks, months, or even years, then please head over to patreon.com/, the Psychology World podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then now you can buymeacoffee.com/ Connor Wiley. So that's enough for the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So today I'm going to have a brilliant interview with Doctor Lisa Riegel, how can neuroscience help students thrive. So it's a brilliant interview and I really did enjoy it. And I know that you're going to love it just as much as I did. So this is Lisa's bio. Dr. Lisa Riegel holds a PhD in Education and Policy and Leadership from the Ohio State University. She created the NeuroWell framework, a brain-based approach to engagement and change. Lisa helps leaders, schools, and organizations use neuroscience to create cultures of engagement, fulfillment, and sustainable growth. With over 2 decades of experience in education, leadership, and organizational strategy, Lisa bridges brain science and human systems to help people think better, connect better, and perform better, so change actually lasts. And as I said, this was a brilliant interview that I really loved and really found insightful. So let's dive into it. So, hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Psychology World podcast. And in the content part of today's episode, I have a brilliant and very impressive guest who manages to blend neuroscience and education. And as you all know, as an aspiring educational psychologist, education is something that I'm really passionate about. Hi Lisa, so can you please introduce yourself, what you do, and how you got into the line of work?
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name's Lisa Riegel, and I am kind of a transformation change specialist in schools. And I focus on bringing neuroscience to schools to help them understand how to set up culture and also how to work with behavior in students and also with their staff, and so that teachers are not burned out. And I started my journey, I was a teacher for 9 years, and then I was an administrator, and then I had the opportunity to do my doctoral work at Ohio State and I studied leadership. But what I was really interested in was the human system as opposed to policy. So I studied, social sciences and psychology around motivation and engagement and behavior. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I really dug into the brain science with the idea that real change starts in the brain. And unfortunately, educators are not trained very well or at all really on how the brain works. And so it's become kind of my mission to help people understand, when we understand that any behavior, academic, social, or work behaviors for the adults in the system, is the intersection of our biology and our context. And so if we understand the biology, then we reframe the problems that we see. And then ultimately we can control the context. And so, how do we set up a safe, supportive, proactive context to help reduce the biological reactions that we're having to our environment?
Definitely, and I thank you for that because I know. So I used to work in like special education,
Mhm.
and one of the biggest bugbears though was that we aren't trained, we aren't taught, and it was only because of my psychology background that I was able to apply different bits of like understanding and different theories, concepts. But so many people are just thrown in it; they don't know, and teacher burnout and staff burnout is so high. Like I think the school that I used to work for, they had like a 50% staff turnover rate
Yeah.
because it was so hard to cope. So thank you for the brilliant work that you're trying to do. And I just wanted to like say that just so we can frame the podcast episode in terms of why this is so badly needed. So why is a brain science needed now?
Well, I think that people are unhappy. We have a global mental health crisis, and we you can't learn when your brain's dysregulated. And so we have sort of two main problems that our schools are facing. One is mental health problems that they are not equipped to deal with, and the second is that we have reduced executive function in the kids that are coming to us. And so when you think about biology and context, there's a lot of contextual factors that have impacted our executive function development. So for example, I used to memorize phone numbers. I used to memorize addresses. Just the way I lived my life as a child, you had to use your working memory a lot. And in today's world, we don't have to do that because our phone does that for us. And scientists call that cognitive offloading. And so we are offloading the executive function to a device. And as AI comes into our lives in so many different ways, it's exacerbating that problem. And I love technology, but the problem that I see is that educators haven't recognized that the way that we live our life is changing our executive functioning, and we're not really putting anything in place to strategically help build that in students, and it's causing academic problems, which then cause emotional and behavioral problems. The other piece with context is like our media that we consume really portrays the world as a dangerous and chaotic place, positions people as mean. When I was a kid, I watched like Little House on the Prairie and Saved by the Bell, and shows that were very family oriented. They were about like owning your mistakes, and that people were generally kind and that you could pull together. And in today's media landscape, it's about like, hey, Connor, you and I are going to manipulate that person and vote him off the island. It's about power and deceit. And so that helps shape a worldview for people, and it impacts the way we perceive our reality and the way that we respond. And then we have social media. Social media is the devil. We all know that. But the other thing I think with social media that we don't think about is the decline of altruism. Because if I'm online, I can put a flag or a ribbon or something in my profile, and I can get 4,000 likes. So very low risk, very high reward. Where if I'm in a real brick and mortar space and I help somebody and they say thank you, I get one dopamine hit. So it's a much higher risk and a much smaller reward. So one of the things I try to talk to schools about is, can we create this protective bubble when kids come into school, that this is a place where you can get dopamine hits, where we can have low risk, high reward interactions between students and teachers, so that we are incentivizing altruistic behavior.
Wow, that was brilliant. And there's definitely a lot to unpack there because when you were talking though, but like I was thinking that for technology, schools, to some extent, I think schools they are trying because we all see like these are policies, but I don't think that I think that there's a policy gap between what the policy says and what's actually happening. Because because at the school that I used to work for, and in lots of other educational settings that I've worked in, we happily let the students go on like their Chromebooks, their technology, but there's always an AI summary, like there's always AI trying to interfere with their independent research skills. That policy says that we've got to allow it. So how do we actually make this into actionable steps better to protect the children.
Right, and it's not about just getting phones out of schools or just using technology. It's really about, even when I grew up, I had family dinners with my parents and they were boring. You had to listen to your parents and you weren't interested in a lot of things, but what you learned in those family dinners, because in my day, you weren't allowed to get up until dinner was over. And so I learned the rhythm of conversation. I learned how to read nonverbal signals. I learned how to be curious and ask questions so I could find things interesting. And from thousands of experiences, that became natural. And in today's world, kids are not getting those experiences because people are either on their devices or not not together at all and doing family conversations, playing family games. And so when they come to school, they don't have those social engagement skills. So then their anxiety ramps up because it's uncomfortable. And then you end up with, the biology takes over and now we're in anxiety and now we can't think. And so we just have a lot of contextual factors in the world. The other one that really upsets me is the over identification of mental health disorders.
Mm.
And, I think that, and I have two kids, I have a 20 and a 23-year-old, and both of them have come to me and been like, "Oh, I have such social anxiety." And I'm like, everyone is uncomfortable in a novel social setting. Everyone. But the key is your body has kind of four states of awake. So you can either be calm, you can be alert, and alert's actually good. Alert's when you're focused and you get just a little hit of stress chemicals to help really, get you ready to perform. Kids today don't understand how that phase feels. And so they move right into the third stage, which is alarm. And alarm is when the limbic brain has taken over and the part that makes you you is no longer operating. And so that's why, like, if you get super upset and then you calm down, you're like, why did I say that? That's not even who I am. Like, what was I even thinking? And the reality was you weren't. In fact, 80% of the traffic in our brain is below our nose. So there's a whole lot of thinking going on in the unconscious part of our brain. And I my big push is that if we can be self-aware by understanding our biology and understanding what are the things that dysregulate our body, then we can have self-regulation techniques and then we can have self-control. But I think there's a lot of people walking around feeling very out of control because they don't understand how to live in that alert phase. And so a little bit of sadness is depression. A little bit of nervousness is anxiety. And the medical field is in the business to sell pills. And so they diagnose us, and we had a report from our National Institute of Health that said social anxiety is misdiagnosed 98% of the time. That is a
Oh,
lot. Yes, and, like, bipolar is up in the 60s, depression, I mean, really high numbers of misdiagnoses, and I think, when we diagnose kids with a mental health disease, then that creates a confirmation bias in them that they're sick. And so when you think of how our brain forms perceptions, and this is one of the things that I try to teach everybody that will listen to me, is that the way our brain creates a perception is we have the limbic part of our brain, which does not know time and can't tell a story. And we have kind of a data manager there is our thalamus. And our data manager's job, who I call Harold. So Harold's job is to take in all the information from the environment and to collect information from our vagus nerve about whether our body's operating well, and then write up a report. Before he writes that report, he goes into our sensory memory bank, which is also in that limbic system, doesn't know time, can't tell a story. So he looks for associations between what's going on now and what's happened to us in the past. If every single situation was a brand new situation, our brain would explode. So we have to put kind of patterns together. But the problem is those patterns are formed through our context. And so if our context is that the world is safe and supportive and people are kind, then our thalamus, our data manager, is going to look for examples that confirm that. And so we have all of these negative sort of filters in our brain. And it's kind of like I use the example of like a colander or a spaghetti strainer. If you have a banana and you shove it through a colander, on the other end, it doesn't look like a banana anymore. It's still a banana, but it doesn't look that way. So our perception is the smushed up banana. The reality is the banana. And how that messed up banana comes to be is through our personal experiences and how our brain has coupled emotional responses to certain stimuli. And so when we understand that, we can understand that this is not that. Like what I'm experiencing right now, my brain may be making a faulty association. So I'll give you an example. I hate to be late. When I was a child, my parents got divorced. And so when my dad would have like his night with me, he was always late. So I spent a lot of time sitting on my front stoop waiting for my dad. My little 8-year-old brain associated negative feelings of being worthless or unloved or things like that with time. And it's a faulty association. But throughout my much of my early life, before I really gained self awareness about all of this, I would become really uncomfortable when I was running late. And sometimes it would cause anxiety or anger, where it was like I couldn't even have fun. I was so mad. Like if my husband was running late, it just dysregulated my body. And then I had a hard time calming myself down. Well, once I recognized that that's a faulty association, then I, the smart part of my brain, was able to tell Harold, my data manager, hey, don't make that association because it's not true. And I was able to change the way that my brain reacts when I'm late. And I still don't like it, but it doesn't ruin my day. It doesn't dysregulate me to the point where I'm just angry. It's just I don't like being late. And I'm able to be proactive and leave earlier so that I don't run into a situation where I'm going to have to face being late. And I think we have a lot of kids and teachers and people in general who are living with Harold, right? Harold is deciding how they live their life because he is making these associations and we're not aware of them. So I think that self awareness starts by understanding how we are perceiving our reality and then having some self awareness and self control to say, hey, I'm the boss of the brain and I get to tell you how to respond, not the other way around.
Yeah, definitely. And one of my biggest bugbears or problems with the education system is that we don't teach kids these vital life skills about their mental health, about their psychology. And like I've been through like lots of stuff that well, and my mental health and my trauma recovery only got better when I started to learn these skills. So I think that if it took me so long, and if I went through lots of pain before I learned that, what are other kids are going through? So I think that's one change we've got to do.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I've been doing professional development for teachers and working in schools for 25 years. And so you get a lot when you're doing trainings, you get a lot of teachers that kind of look above their glasses at you or they're like on their computers half listening. But when I go in and actually teach them about the brain and how it works, they close their computers and they lean in like they are interested in this stuff. And I just think it's a real tragedy that we're not teaching a deep neuroscience pathway, not one class in a teacher prep program or a principal prep program, but really infusing this because at the end of the day, it's a people based system. And we know very little about the people. We just know a whole bunch of tactics about how to structure things or how to do a routine. Or, I always hate the term classroom management. It's not about managing a classroom, it's about building a community and teaching kids how to be a member in that community. And so even the words we use are about control and compliance, and kids feel that. And so it's not a happy place. And so trying to build, I call it a neuro well culture, is a culture that's about, you know, neuro wellness. It's about knowing your brain. It's about knowing how to take control of your brain so that we're not running around bottoms up. We're running around with the thinking part of our brain deciding how we want to respond to situations.
Yeah, so we will move on to the neuroculture in a moment. But so in the UK, yeah, something that I would really appreciate your thoughts on is that our schools that used to be very much public owned, they were very much schools, but over time they've shifted more towards private businesses. How much do you think that's possibly impacted the change of a focus from management? Um, Sort of just like focusing on like grades, getting money, sponsorship, those sort of like stuff. I'm not sure if I've made my question clear.
Yeah, well, I think the big problem that I see in the United States is that we measure what matters and what we end up measuring is what matters. And when we moved into this high stakes testing, and I have no problem with accountability. I have no problem with doing tests for kids every so often. But when we connected it to teacher quality, that was the real key problem because now when a student isn't progressing the way that I want them to, now I'm mad at them because they're impacting my data and my teacher quality data, as opposed to before that was such high stakes, we were able to look at that child and say, okay, this is a puzzle to solve. I'm going to help this child figure things out. And it was about more than just their math score. So I think that this over reliance on test scores has shifted the system away from I teach kids to I teach content. And the kids are no longer the center, even though we say they are sometimes, the way that we behave doesn't reinforce that. And then even at the leadership level, when principals just are railing on data all day long, and then they are annoyed that teachers aren't forming relationships with their kids, it's like, well, you're not celebrating that. You're not reinforcing or supporting that kind of development. And so some of what I do with schools too, I work with, like, I think we have a purpose problem because we originally education was about learning a little bit about a lot of things because information wasn't available. So once the internet and AI came, like, information's available to anybody in any form all the time. So that purpose doesn't really matter as much anymore. I mean, you need to know some things, but that shouldn't be the end goal. Then we moved to career development. So we said, okay, well, information's democratized now, so we don't need to focus on that, even though our assessments still do. And then we moved to career readiness and we started building all these career pathways and credentialing routes. And the problem now is that with AI, the workflow is so disrupted and nobody knows what it's going to look like. So now we've got this whole structure in place that we can be creating pathways to nowhere for kids. So now we're sitting around going, what's the purpose? And people keep talking about, like, the purpose, we need them to be critical thinkers and problem solvers and leaders of the future. And I'm like, well, we do, but we're not doing anything strategically. We're not measuring that along the way. So I was at a school a few weeks ago, and the task for the teachers was define critical thinking and start to put together some actual observable criteria of what you see when a student is using critical thinking. And in 2 hours, they couldn't even come up with a definition that they agreed on. And so we've got these, like, this word salad of what we want to see kids become, but we haven't operationalized it and actually said, okay, so what's the strategy for developing a scope and sequence to teaching critical thinking? And how do we align that with their developmental capacity at different ages? Because I think sometimes we expect kids who are 6 to be way beyond what they are. And even high school students, we think they should be adults when we know their brains are not developed yet. So, how do we become part of that? So, I think we need to shift to a purpose that's really about how do we prepare kids for a post AI world. And what I would argue is we have to be really intentional about building those executive functions and those, you know, people skills, thinking skills, problem solving skills, the ability to discriminate information as useful or not useful. Because if we lose this, we lose what makes us unique as humans. I mean, this is the part that makes us human. The rest of us is just, an animal brain to keep us alive.
Yeah, wow, and I'm truly like the reason I was smiling so much when you were talking about that was because I was like, that's mind blowing because it's so true, and it's just like yeah, like I'm definitely after this episode gonna have to reflect on it because what you've said is just so true. Like our school systems though are just based on like word salads, and like we have no idea how to actually make stuff. And I'm sure we could get into a whole political conversation about it, but we're not going to. This is not a political show, but it really is something that all of us can think about. So, what is a neuro well culture?
So a neuro-well culture is a culture where the people in the culture, students and teachers and principals, understand the brain, understand how it works, and then create a context that is safe, supportive, and proactive. So the safety piece, though, is not just physical safety. And I think schools spend a lot of time on the physical safety piece, but it's also intellectual safety and emotional safety. So, what are routines and practices that we have in place to help students understand their emotional brain and regulate when they're out of sorts? Like, do we have routines in place? Do we build a sense of agency and power for the kids so that they feel like they can control their brains and their emotions? The intellectual safety piece is really around, are we meeting kids where they are? And again, going back to testing, it's like right now, even though we talk about differentiation, we've talked about it for 20 years, I don't see a whole lot of it going on in the classroom. And I'll hear teachers saying things like, well, I just got to get through this curriculum. And I'm like, you're talking, not teaching, right? Because if nobody's learning, you're not teaching, you're just talking. So it has become very teacher centered around, I just have to deliver this to you and then I've done my job. That's not intellectually safe for kids who aren't ready for the information you're delivering. So that's kind of the safety piece. The supportive piece is really about power sharing and building agency. And what I see in schools is that the policies and the practices are so much about control, compliance, completion, credentialing. And what it needs to be about is building agency and independence and adaptability and giving kids voice in their education. And that's not really happening in a lot of the settings that I'm in. And it causes a lot of behavior problems because, especially kids who have dysregulated systems or kids who come from trauma, they need some power and some sense of self. And then the third is proactive. And I've said to teachers so many times, so like to teachers of little ones, so can you predict they're going to roll around on the carpet and poke each other? And they laugh and they say, yeah. And I say, then why are you angry when they do it? Right? Put things in place proactively that give them spaces to move or that teach them how to appropriately socially engage with other people when they want attention. And then now you don't have to be angry when they're rolling around the carpet poking each other. And so it's that safe, supportive, and proactive with the goal of doing what you need to do to help students and teachers become self aware, self regulated, and in self control.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because I know that. So the school that I used to work in was a special educational needs well, a needs a school though. So we were very much small, low classrooms. We had like different things in a place, and we were sort of like encouraged to do that. When I reflect on my mainstream school work, none of that was in place. This was never a conversation. It was very much a case of we're just meant to sit quietly, listen to the teacher talk, and you could have those conversations when I was in sixth form. Yes, that's the 16 to 18 education here in like the UK. But when you were in like younger years, you couldn't do that at all. And that was not very stimulating. It definitely wasn't safe. Like I remember being quite anxious and nervous about wanting to raise a point because I didn't want to like draw a attention. I didn't know if that teacher would like what I've got to say.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think, just recognizing, and I hear teachers say this all the time, that kids are so much harder today. They're so much more difficult to work with. And, really, I think what they're saying is that they're less willing to sit. They're less willing to sit and get, and there's biology to that. I mean, our attention span as a species has declined, and yet we're still doing big long lectures. I've watched, in first grade classrooms, teachers that are doing direct instruction for 25 or 30 minutes. And I'm like, kids cannot focus that long. They can't. And so one of the things when I, like in a neuro well culture, I talk about doing learning sprints. So a learning sprint is basically take your learning and chunk it. So you might say, okay, we're going to do a 10-minute learning sprint. And you put a timer up on the board so that the students can see 10 minutes. And you say, during this, I'm going to give you some instructions. And so I expect everybody to be quiet and listen to me when I'm giving you the instructions. And then you're going to be working independently for the rest of that 10 minutes. And so during that time, I need you to be quiet. And so you do that 10 minutes and you put the timer on, and it teaches kids how long is 10 minutes. When I focus, what can I accomplish in 10 minutes? And then at the end of that 10 minutes, when the timer goes off, no matter where you are, if I've taken too long and I'm still talking at that 10 minutes, I stop and we take a 2-minute break. And that break is maybe turn to your neighbor and tell them one good thing that happened today. Or what's one thing you love about yourself that other people don't know? Or, would you rather this or that? Just little conversation pieces so that you teach the kids how to focus and then how to shift focus and then how to come back and focus again on the academics. And it's been such a successful um, program for people. So teachers that are using it, I had a kindergarten teacher who was like, I cannot believe how much more work they're getting done. And I'm like, yeah, because it's the same thing as rolling around poking each other. We know they don't have the attention span we're asking of them. When we alter the way that we chunk our day to honor that, then we get more out of them, because instead of fighting all of them for 20 minutes, you've got them focused for 10, you give them a little bit of, free time, brain time, and then focus for another 10 or 15. You can alter the time. But learning sprints is one of the most powerful strategies that I've seen that has helped increase the productivity and engagement in students.
Me, and I really agree with that because when I was at the university and I did some like student ambassador work, there was I would like create content and I would like present it to like a classes though. A lecture was the worst thing ever, and like you never give a kids like a lecture. So you would do like a short a quiz. You would do something interactive. You would do something like a movement based, and you make it in like engaging for them, and that's why we always had such positive feedback compared to be honest, boring normal lessons because the teachers just want to like go through the content, make sure the students get their work done, get that class out so they can get another classroom in. And when you really think about it, the education system is so strange and it's not built for kids. You really do need to update it.
Right. Well, and I like lectures because I am an auditory learning and I can enjoy a lecture, but I am in the minority. And I also think that even if there's a place to just talk to kids, but it's got to be short doses. And you think about the media we're competing with. I mean, media is designed to be short and highly interactive, highly like, you know, images and graphics and all kinds of things that keep our attention. And when you go from this is my lived experience of all of the stuff I do outside of school, and then I come sit in school, it's like going from digital to analog, right? And so you're sitting in the classroom then and you're just like, oh my gosh. And then if you don't have like a timer, or I always liken it to if you go on a treadmill and you say I'm going to run for 30 minutes, and then you're running and you're like, oh, I've got to be close, and you look down and it's only been like 7 minutes, and you're like, I'm never going to make it. If you chunk it and do sort of intervals and you say, okay, I'm going to do 5 minutes this way, and then I'm going to maybe slow down for 2 minutes, and then I'm going to run for 3 minutes, you can chunk it and you can actually achieve your goal to be on there for 30 minutes, and it goes a lot faster. So when kids come to school, it's 8 hours of just never ending time. And that's just way too long. And so figuring out ways that we can not only address the emotional pieces that we need to address with kids, but also this kind of structure and routines that can help kids feel more success.
Yeah, thank you. So, if there are any teachers, teaching assistants, and anyone who actually works in education listening to the episode, what actionable steps can they take to create a neuro well culture in their school?
So one thing is start the learning sprints. It's super easy, and literally all you need is a timer. And you will find that it only takes like, and I've done this with incarcerated youth in teenagers. And so you think those kids are definitely disruptive. It works with them and they appreciate it because they have that quiet space. So it's super easy to implement. The other thing that I tell teachers that's super easy to implement is something called fizzy or flat. And so I take a can of soda and I shake it up and I take the kids outside and I open the can, and then the pop explodes everywhere, right? So I tell them we are like a can of soda. We're carbonated. And just like if you drink, a Coke that's too carbonated, it's gross, or if it's flat, it's gross. You want it just right. You need to be just right as well in order to learn. So if you are feeling fizzy or feeling flat, I can't see that. So you need to let me know, because what I also see in classrooms is we don't mean to, but we elevate stress, and we actually exacerbate problems because we don't know that a kid is having a stress reaction. We just think that they're just not engaged, or they're tuned out, or they put their head down, or they're acting out. So I give kids the opportunity when they come in the classroom, if they're feeling fizzy or feeling flat, they just say fizzy or flat. And then I know that I need to give them a little grace and space. And I teach them how to calm their body down when they're feeling that way, or we have some type of intervention for them so that they can come back to feeling, just right. And it's been amazing because it gives kids a voice. It honors the fact that, hey, everybody's not okay all day. That's all right. Like, it happens. We have ups and downs all the way through our day, and you have a right to ask me to show you some grace and space while you calm down. And then you can keep data on that. If there's a kid who, is fizzy all the time, then you say, okay, well, maybe we need to have a meeting with a counselor or with the parents to talk about what's going on. But I had a young woman who I worked with. She was in elementary school, and she had a very tough life. She was in a foster family, and there were like 9 kids. And she would come in. I mean, and her behavior was like crazy. I mean, she was like under desks and just completely out of control. And there were 4 or 5 adults that were literally just trying to harangue her all day long. So what we did was we said, okay, can we recognize that this is out of our control, that she is coming to school already dysregulated? So how do we help her regulate before she, make that transition before she goes to class? So we started having her eat her breakfast in the sensory room, and she would sit in a swing and just kind of swing back and forth. And there was an aide in there and became kind of her person, and just, hey, how you doing today? What's new? What do you like to do? Just chit chatted with her, and it had a 2.5 hour impact on her behavior. And then she would start to dysregulate, and then we had to put another intervention in place. But the reality is, these kids are dealing with stuff that's pretty heavy. And so we can't expect them when they walk in the school doors, well, you're not at home anymore. So why are you acting like this? It's again, the way our brain perceives has everything to do with our past and how we're associating present to past. And so just simple things like that can make a huge difference, but it requires that we understand that brain.
So, do you think that, because I completely agree, like what you said, that people and teachers really do think though, but that's like that's your home life. You're in a school now; it doesn't impact you. So, do you think that one problem could that be like class size and the lack of teachers? Because in like the UK, on a like mainstream school where you would tend to have like 30 kids, one teacher, that teacher cannot be a counselor, a support worker, everything. They've just got to try and do their job. And if kids having the bad day, they are going to try, but they can't do that much because they've got 30 kids to try and help, support, and teach.
Yeah, and class size comes up a lot, and it is hard when you have a lot of kids in the classroom. However, that's where that neuro well culture, that is a culture routine. This is how we do business in the school. So if we start to set up those routines where we have, if we do the learning sprint with the brain break, we can use that brain break strategically to teach them a relaxation technique, or to teach them, so what happens is the number of students who need additional interventions is reduced. And so it's a healthy classroom in general. And it also gives you a chance to develop some relationships with students, because you can say, one of the other things I tell teachers is play memory games, build that working memory. So, what's your favorite ice cream? What's your dog's name? What's your whatever? It gives you a chance to make some connections with the student and their interests, so that you can then refer to them while you're teaching. So, there's a lot you can do, even if you have a large class size, if you're setting the culture up to build those things in, as opposed to thinking, okay, I'm just going to teach as usual, and then now I'm going to have to intervene with all these various kids. You find, and then the other thing too is, if you're teaching them about their brain and you're putting those routines in place, then you're giving the kid the power to control themselves. If they don't have any self-awareness and they don't have any regulation skills, then it falls to you to intervene when they're having a problem. But if you build those skills in them, they can do it themselves. And then it reduces the amount of interruption for a teacher, whether you have 15 kids or 30 kids. Because I've seen classrooms too with 15 kids that are way harder than some of the classrooms with 30 kids. So I think that we think that class size plays a big role, but it's interesting because the studies they've done over here on class size have really not shown that the class size is a huge variable for student success, which it seems counterintuitive, but that's what the research is saying.
Okay, thank you. And that's one of the reasons why I asked it because it's such a like common
Yep.
thing to able to like say that was I just like wanted to know the truth on it because like sometimes I think oh well the solution is simply smaller class size. For starters, that's so impractical, but also is the solution really as easy as it is? So thank you for that. Are there any other like sort of tips and tricks that you can help us with?
I think one of the other things I would say is that teachers need to take care of themselves. I've never been in a classroom that's functioning well when the teacher's not regulated. So, a couple things that I talk to teachers about is like when you are feeling stress and you know that you're starting to have your limbic brain take over and you're reacting instead of being strategic about what you're doing, just tell the class, hey, I need a brain break, I'm feeling a lot of stress. Turn the light out, sit down, do some breathing, model for them that people get stressed, it's okay, and that we can take control of that and we can calm ourselves down. And it's interesting because it builds empathy with the kids as well, because the kids look at the teacher and go, oh wow, she's human and she's feeling stress right now, and then they'll be supportive to the teacher. So super easy to do, just turn the lights out, sit down, and just say, okay, I'm going to take a couple deep breaths because I'm feeling a little bit anxious right now. um, the other thing is having the teachers, so I call it the purple folder, but I pair teachers up based on like whose classroom's right next to theirs. And I get a purple folder. And if the teacher's starting to escalate, because remember, behavior is biology and context. So sometimes we just got to get out of the context in order to calm ourselves down. So if I'm starting to feel stressed, I might be like, hey, Connor, can you run this purple folder next door? And the other teacher, when they see the purple folder, immediately switch. And so the two teachers switch classrooms, and the other teacher can be in a different context and kind of calm down, and the kids, they know, like, okay, I'm going to read or just keep working on what I'm working on, or the teacher says I'll be right back. And then once I've calmed down, then I send the purple folder back and we switch back. And that's been a really effective way to help teachers manage through the day, because you think about in other jobs, like if you're having a minute, you can be like, you know what, I am just going to take 10 minutes and go have a cup of coffee and like think about something happy. But when you're teaching, you can't do that. Like you're on all day long. And so it gives you kind of an exit ramp or, relief valve that you can use when you're really feeling stressed. And sometimes even just knowing it's there reduces your stress and helps you stay in control.
That is brilliant, and that's really insightful. And like, so I definitely know though that if I was a teacher, and if I was delivering some of my outreach content, I would be at first very nervous about doing that and modeling for the kids, because I would be scared about them like mocking me, judging me, and thinking less of me. But that's just a short-term impact. What you might be doing for the long term is, like you say, modeling, inspiring them, teaching them really critical skills, which which just isn't covered in the education at the moment. So thank you
Right.
so much for that.
Yeah. Well, and I think also, it's it's great for the kids because you can even say, you know what, I'm starting to feel stressed. Is anybody else feeling stressed in here? Let's just take a minute and let's all breathe together. Let's take a couple breaths, and then you can teach them a breathing technique. And what I see in schools a lot is that, at least over here, they'll do movement breaks because they know that kids need to move. So they'll have, like, the kids are getting out of control and they'll be like, okay, we're going to do a wiggle break or something, and then they put on a video and the kids dance or things like that. But two things: one is they wait until things are out of control, so it's a reactive approach versus a proactive approach. Like the learning sprints create a proactive approach of little doses of this through the day. um, and the other piece is that when you have the whole group, like I might not want to dance, like I might not be somebody who enjoys that. Some kids do, some kids don't. So creating ways that there's a little break, but maybe kids have choices in what they want to do. Maybe some kids just want to focus and draw. Maybe some kids do want to get up and move. Maybe other kids just want to chat with their neighbor. Like it's okay to give kids a little bit of unstructured time. I think that teachers have had this pressure that bell to bell, they have to be on. And that's just not how our brain learns. We need a couple minutes of downtime to sort what we've just heard and just kind of, shift our focus somewhere else. And so, that can have a big impact on helping the kids to be able to be calm throughout the day instead of being reactive and waiting until they're out of control.
Brilliant. So I could definitely talk like at you like all day, but we're almost out of time. So is there anything else that you wanted to cover on the podcast? Do you think that we've missed anything?
The only other thing I would say is for folks who are listening who are going into the ed psych route, if they are doing any kind of counseling with students, I think it's really important that they ask the administration to share some of the strategies that they use with students. Because you come in and you get counseling, and the whole point of counseling is skill building, right? Like figuring that self awareness, self regulation, self control. So kids have great sessions with those counselors, and then they go back into a classroom that they try something that they've been told to do. The teacher doesn't recognize that this is a strategy, and then they say no, and now the kid's doubly mad. And so I worked with a school once where there was real animosity between the people who were providing counseling and the teachers, because the teachers saw their methods as, this is this kid who's always in trouble, always disruptive, and you're down there playing basketball with him, or you're down there doing this with him. I don't understand. And so we actually had the therapist do a little professional development with the teachers to say, this is what therapy looks like. These are the things that we say to kids, and build that bridge. Because if we give kids the chance to practice those skills in all these different contexts, they will be able to make them automatic. But when we have like a great experience in counseling and then send them into a polluted context, it unravels those, and it actually makes them put their feet in the sand and say, I'm not trying this because it doesn't work.
I will definitely be trying that in the future. That is, oh, this is really insightful. So, if everyone wanted to connect with you, where can they find you online?
So I'm on LinkedIn, just Lisa Riegel on LinkedIn. I also have a website, lisariegel.com. And then I have my other website is EP, like Education Partnerships, epinstitute.net. And that's the website that's more school focused, because I work in the private sector as well. And then if they go to Amazon and type in my name, they can see the books that I have. I have NeuroWell. I also have a book about parent engagement called Stop Doing What Doesn't Work. And then I have a book for leaders that's called Aspirations to Operations, that helps them move from their theory of change to actually implement and sustain it.
Brilliant, Lisa. So, I really wish you the best of luck with the future, and a massive thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, I really hope that you enjoyed the content part of today's episode, because that interview was a lot of fun. It was really interesting, really insightful, and it definitely got me thinking. And for the past few days, I have been reflecting on it, and just that having a proactive a approach is really important, but also chunking lessons, doing learning spins is also really valuable. And as I said in the interview, when I was working at the university and I was creating content, this is what we did. Because just having a teacher just drone on at you is really boring. It's not engaging. And kids do not want to sit still. And to be honest, they rightfully shouldn't. They shouldn't have to sit still though. And it really does make you think about the technology, the impact that's having, because when social media, YouTube, and so many other sources of entertainment are really grabbing our attention in that short, sharp bit, then sitting in a lecture and having to sit down for ages, that is not fun. So, how do we use some of that attention techniques that social media and other content uses in the classroom? Because that is how you engage your kids. So it's a brilliant to a massive thank you for Dr. Riegel for coming on the podcast. And I really do recommend that you check out her work, her books, and everything else that she does online, because she's really impressive. And if you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. We're always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, please check out Cognitive Psychology, a guide to neuropsychology, neuroscience, and cognitive psychology, available in all the usual places. And if you want to see a podcast on a monthly basis and get tons of great rewards, then please head on over to patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then please head on over to buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. And lastly, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode, so please reach out in all the normal ways. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwiley.net. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.